Hi, this is Mr. Gideon. So now in Chapter 2 we want to expand on Chapter 1, start to use models, theories, even illustrations to address this problem of scarcity that we began to discuss in Chapter 1. Specifically in Chapter 2 we discussed the basics of the Production Possibilities Frontier, or the PPF, which is also known as the Production Possibilities Curve, or PP curve. As a matter of fact, there are two curves. One is straight line and one is bowed outward, which shows increasing or accelerating opportunity costs. Later on in this chapter we'll talk about, in light of people's productive possibilities and their potential, when does comparative advantage, specialization, and trade come in. But for now, let's talk about production. So Production Possibilities Frontier is a framework. It's an illustrative model in which we examine production. It represents a combination of two goods usually. Sometimes it can be two services that can be produced in a certain period of time under conditions of a given state of technology and using all of your resources efficiently and wisely. The Production Possibilities Frontier has two regions: an attainable region, which has a collection of points along a curve, which is your potential, and then an area beyond that curve which represents what is not attainable yet. It might be attainable at some point in the future, but it isn't today. The Production Possibilities Frontier also illustrates, because it has two choices, this concept of opportunity cost. The reality is, if you have a Production Possibilities Frontier for an individual or for a country, that they have more than two choices typically for how to use their resources, their time, their energy. So this, by nature, like with many theories and models, is an oversimplification. Although, as we said before, you might have a lot of different choices, but you still have a second-ranked choice as you put some resources in one direction, and that second-ranked choice represents your opportunity cost. The most efficient decision makers, both running a country or individuals looking at their personal situation, are ones that try to maximize the output with the given resources and technology that's available to them. If you are in some territory that's not at your potential, then obviously you're not employing some of your resources wisely or efficiently. Economic growth would be moving your potential to some area that was previously unattainable. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. If you've got a straight line Production Possibilities Frontier, it looks like this. It's a curve that's a straight line. On the next page of your notes, you have a bowed outward one. But let's start with the straight line Production Possibilities Frontier. Any point that would be found along this curve would represent the potential for an individual or for an economy, depending on what situation you're looking at. Let's pretend, for instance, this is a Production Possibilities Frontier for you who just got stranded on an island, and you're saying, so based on the resources and what I know how to do, I got two choices. I can put my time and resources and energy towards the production of coconuts that I can consume, or the quantity of fish that's possible for me, or some combination in between. If I put all of my time, energy, and resources into coconut production, I could get 30 units of coconuts, but none of fish. The other extreme, of course, would be 40 units of fish and no coconuts. Most of us probably would get tired of having just one of these things, so we would have some combination of the two, somewhere in between on this line, if we're being very efficient. If we're not, maybe we're still learning how to fish. We've never fished in our lives, and we're not fully up to our potential. We're at some point below this curve. That's what C could represent. If you're inside of a curve, whether it's a straight line or a bowed outward curve, then as an individual or a country, you're not meeting your potential. Point D shows what is not feasible. It's beyond your potential. It's impossible today. Perhaps at some point, if there's growth, though, you could meet that potential. That's shown down here in the bowed outward diagram. Maybe originally you had some choices available to you in terms of production combinations between coconuts and fish along this curve, and then something dramatic happens in the future and expands your possibilities, expands your potential, and now you have a brand new curve that you can draw. And that's what growth would look like. Let's go back to the original curve, the straight line one, though, because a really important concept that's shown here is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost, of course, is a form of trade-off that you have to be prepared to accept as you decide where you're going to allot your resources. So let's say that you decided for a while after you were stranded on this island, you were going to be at point A. You were willing to be very efficient and produce a combination of 15 units of coconuts and 20 units of fish to live on a regular basis. But after a while you changed your mind and you said, I want to go closer to fish. I'm getting tired of coconuts. I know I need to have some degree of balance in my diet, so I'm going to move towards point B. That's fine. You get 8 more units, of course, of production of fish, but what do you give up? What's your opportunity that you're giving up, or your opportunity cost in terms of the production of coconuts? You give up 6 units of coconuts that you could have produced, because now you're moving, in this example, from 15 to 9. There's all kinds of situations that we can talk about, but if you get a question on a quiz or a test that has numbers like this, you need to be prepared to answer that question in this kind of format. Let's say that we started at point A, and we said we want to go to the extreme of coconuts. We found out that the water is contaminated. We can't afford to eat any fish or we're going to get sick and die, and we go to this extreme of 30. You could still be asked the question, so fine, good choice, works for you. What are you going to give up in terms of the units of fish that you could have produced? Well, as we go from point A to that extreme, as you can see down here on this axis, we give up 20 units of fish that we could have produced for consumption. With a straight line curve like this, there is a constant amount of trade-off as you go from one point to another along the curve if those points are of equal distance. But it's different when you're talking about a bowed outward curve, like this. A bowed outward PPF indicates that there's the law of increasing opportunity costs, or diminishing marginal utility, if you want to think about that. That was in Unit 1. We had the pizza example, the donuts example, when somebody said, you know what, as much as I love donuts, when I get to the 9th, the 10th, the 11th donut, it's just not that useful anymore to me. And there's an increased opportunity cost. In this kind of example, though, just because it's bowed outward doesn't mean we can't do calculations just by looking at points and then saying, how much are we trading off? But the concept that's being illustrated here is a little bit different. It's saying that trading off, going from one point to another along the curve, isn't always going to be an equal amount, because, let's go down to a more detailed illustration of this. As we get further and further to one extreme, let's say that we start at this extreme of 30 for the coconuts, and we want to move towards the production of fish that ends up at point A, producing the first 20 fish requires us only to give up 5 units of coconuts. But if we continue to push it further and further in this direction, and particularly when we get close to the extreme, we have an increase, a more dramatic amount of coconuts that we're giving up to produce each additional unit of fish. And that's essentially what this is showing. Now, of course, you're going to ask yourself in this kind of situation, what's the story behind the numbers? What's the story behind the curve? It's going to differ from situation to situation. Maybe this isn't a castaway, of course. Maybe it's a farmer, and a farmer has 2 different crops that he or she is thinking about producing. And the 2 choices with the land that they have are wheat and corn. And for a long time they've been somewhere in between, doing some wheat and some corn, and then finally they push it and they say, I'm going to do all corn now because it's much more profitable. Well, maybe not all of the land is equally viable for corn production, and so they give up an increasing opportunity cost in terms of wheat as they push more and more to that extreme. Maybe it's not farming. Maybe it's an entrepreneur that's running a company and says, you know what, I know we've always produced 2 products, but now I want to go further and further in the direction of 1 product because it seems to be a good decision for me right now. Well, as he pushes his employees or her employees to that extreme, maybe not all those employees are equally adept at making that change, and they're not as efficient at producing that 1 product or that 1 service. There's going to be an increased opportunity that they're giving up, where those workers could have done something that fit better with their skill set or their experience. So those are some numbers and some descriptions about the difference between the straight line and the bowed outward or the curved production possibilities frontiers. I like to call them PP curves for short. If you've ever seen one of those obnoxious bumper stickers that go on the back of the car, they have a little boy and there's like a stream that kind of comes out from where the boy is. It looks like a pee-pee curve. Next time we'll talk now about trade. Being aware of what your trade-offs are in a certain situation. Is there any way I can be even better off, even more efficient through the use of trade?